Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. For some of you, it might be really late. Over here in San Francisco, it's on the early side. I just want to start off with a land acknowledgement. I'd first like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. As the indigenous stewards of this land, in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten the responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working, on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community, and by affirming their rights as First Peoples. I'd also like to make a couple of shout outs and thanks to our supporters for the After Home exhibition and platform, the Asian Cultural Council for their international working group support, exhibition support from the Akiko Yamazaki and Jerry Yang Endowment Fund, the Carl Williams Contemporary Art Exhibitions Fund, and the Taiwan Academy Ministry of Culture of Taiwan. I did forget to introduce myself. My name is Janet Oh, and I'm the Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art and Programs here at the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco. And joining me is Padma Maitland, Assistant Professor of Architecture at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Padma to introduce the symposium.
Thanks, Janet. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted and honored to be here with you all for the After Hope Symposium. So, marking the inauguration of the Asian Art Museum's Trilogy series, After Hope brings together artists, activists, and community leaders for an interdisciplinary and critical examination of hope's potential to animate form, method, and action. Is hope, as Rebecca Solnit writes, grounded in the wild possibilities of untold futures, or does it reflect a deep commitment to community as posited by Andre Willis? Perhaps, drawing on the photographer Zanel Moholy's idea of visual activism, hope emerges from works that spark concrete political interventions. Over the next 2 days, we'll hear from an incredible lineup of presenters exploring diverse expressions and legacies of hope within contemporary art, using the work of artists from across Asia and its diaspora as guides and catalysts for further inquiry. Through presentations and workshops focused on cultural, material, and pedagogical expressions of hope, this interdisciplinary symposium aims to explore what it means to think after hope as a dynamic index of change. So that's my short introduction. Again, it's my delight to welcome you all for today's first session and for the start of the symposium. And with that, I will hand it back to Janet.
Okay, so first up, we have the panel Aesthetics of Decay. And joining me are Serene Hui, Kobe Ko, Yang Young, and Yushuk Pui Bobby. Just some short intros on them. Yang Young is our moderator and is a writer of art, an independent curator, faculty in classics at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and founder and artistic director of nonprofit Sound Pocket. Her recent co-curations include The Listening Biennial in 2021 and Notating Beauty That Moves from 2018. Kobe Ko is a curator and writer currently based between Hong Kong and Taiwan, and significant curated projects include Chow Kai Chin Community Art Experimental Project, Post-Human Narratives, joining us today, and so on. And Serene is an artist based in the Netherlands and Hong Kong. Her artistic practice aims to reframe and rethink conditions of the contemporary through politically driven art making and research. Serene received her MA from the Royal Academy, The Hague. Yushuk Pui Bobby is a Hong Kong visual artist based in Hong Kong and Oslo. Her practice is focused on the contemporary body through different cultural contexts, and especially the patterns of identity play in multiple roles. Bobby received a BA from Hong Kong Baptist University and MFA at Oslo National Academy of Fine Art. So with that, I hand it over to them.
Thank you, Janet. Thanks to the Asian Art Museum for having us. The first panel, an honor, and makes us a little bit nervous. I'm gonna just quickly introduce, I guess, why we're here on a little personal note, and then I'll let Kobe introduce Post-Human Narratives, which is an exciting project. So a few months ago, I was in the Posthuman Narratives, the Coexisting Land exhibition. It took place in a heritage building in Hong Kong called the Cattle Depot. It's not only one building, but a cluster of them. The Cattle Depot used to be a slaughterhouse for cattle. At first glance in the exhibition, it's uneventful, but at a closer look, everything is trembling in its own rhythm, in its own way. Silkworms wiggling on mulberry leaves, scarves hanging between beams, footprints on sand, and a body bending parts of car. There is a lot to digest. In hindsight, it is this process of digestion that makes me think of the aesthetics of decay. Decay is a natural process. Unlike ruins, which has its own history in contemporary art, decay highlights time rather than collapse or implosion in space. Decay registers not an aftermath, but conditions for rebirth. From where are we born into this moment together with you all? Bobby, as Janet introduced, is currently in Oslo. Serene, Kobe, and I are in Hong Kong with this place name, and yet we all have significant relations elsewhere. Serene in the Netherlands, Kobe in Taiwan, and me, my best friend is in Paris, my family in various other places. So we are all, though, in a post-trauma sort of situation, and we're still going through it. We speak not with any stable, preformed identity. Identity for us is a wounded notion. It's occupied by things that the Posthuman Project refutes, including nativism. So we speak instead from a situatedness, and I'm sure Kobe will introduce this more. This is one of her muses from Donna Haraway. So we speak from a situatedness that perhaps has no name, but then we live our own time, and we live a paradigm or many paradigms away from the notion of borrowed time that had burdened those of us in Hong Kong for a long time. And I think it's now time to say goodbye. And I present to you Kobe Ko, Curator of Posthuman Narratives, and Serene Hui and Bobby Yu.
Thank you so much for Yang Yang. You have a very poetic introduction of our panel. I would like to introduce a bit about my project. The Posthuman Narratives adjusted to a cyborg manifesto written by Donna Haraway, published in 1985. I'm inspired by the notion, and before I get into it, I would like to give a ground of the social movements which happened in 2014 and 2019 in Hong Kong. Both movements are elevated from the conflicts between Hong Kong and China. Then people start to divide themselves or the others by colors, especially basically yellow and blue. Blue are those who support the Hong Kong government, and yellow are those who support the movement. Unfortunately, the concept or meaning of a word or a notion never have enough time to express itself. It is subverted or hijacked in different levels. Then I would say the yellow people might take actions in a neo-fascism way while they are claiming themselves pro-democracy. I believe that this phenomenon is closely influencing everyone who lives in this city. We start calling ourselves Hong Kongers. I feel positive and negative at the same time, of we can eventually identify ourselves, but we are actually not having the sharing imagination or coherence of justice. by that time, I read the book of Haraway, and her notion of refusing identification is deeply inspiring. This is the reason why the project was born. I invited 9 artists from mainly from Hong Kong, also Taiwan and Japan, and they're involved from 2020. It is an online and on-site hybrid exhibition. I leave the link in the chat box. You can like explore it, and you can browse all the artwork of the first phase on our website. Phase 2 was the one Yang Yang mentioned, which was exhibited this summer. We will upload the archival materials soon, so please stay tuned. Today we have Bobby and Serene with us in this panel. We would like to share more about the genre of science fiction as an alternative reality. Maybe you guys want to introduce a bit about your art piece?
Okay, I can start. Hi, everyone. This is Serene, currently in Hong Kong, but I technically am based in the Netherlands. So here you will see that I normally worked, my work reflects where I am at the moment, I would say. So this is a work that I made originally 1 year ago, almost. Yeah, 1 year ago, exactly last summer in the Netherlands. So it was first exhibited as a physical exhibition in a bookstore, in a local bookstore in The Hague, where I live. And the bookstore has a really interesting name, which is called Page Not Found. Like as a physical bookstore, I found it really fascinating to adapt to such a digitalized internet slang as a title for the bookstore. So I was thinking about how do we perceive this space where we used to go, the libraries, newspaper stores, or I mean, when we look for information or when we have a questions, like the first thing we pop up long time ago is libraries, or we go to the newspapers, like this kind of paper material. But then, of course, now we switch to the internet, and we have the mighty Google, where basically you can search for literally everything, anything. And it was a coincidence when I started this project, because it's exactly also in the I think it was half a year since the protest broke out, and people are like every day online discussing about all the conspiracies, all the actions, and how we should move forward and what we can do online and offline, because it was also the start of COVID. And one day I saw a post on Facebook. Somebody was sharing a screenshot of a Google search, where normally if you put anything, I mean, if you type anything on the search bar, it pops up like this 10 top search results. And I find it really poetic in a way. I mean, it kind of look like a short poetry, algorithmic poetry in a sense. And I started to play around with this Google search. And that day when I see this post where somebody posts, if you type in Google, especially just Google, yellow, sorry. I mean, yellow, the color yellow on Google bar, search bar, and you see nothing. And Kobe just mentioned about this division based on color schemes among the whole movement. People are basically identified into yellow camps and blue camps based on their political stance. So people discover that in a certain time period of a certain day around that period, yeah. And you cannot see anything if you type yellow on the Google search bar. And people start to have this conspiracy and discussions about, wow, this is this is going real and they are going crazy because it is such a obvious and it's now on the table. It's so visible, and I just find it. I mean, of course, we know that it's not only about censorship, but there must be, to a certain degree, some kind of control on the internet, on anything that is happening in Google search, because you know that it's not neutral in a way as we used to think about it. And I was thinking, if I search in different region, what will happen? Because you have this function where you can switch in between regions on Google and see if it reflects or it shows up. I mean, it's supposed to be reflecting how the people in that region collectively think, or it's like the most searched questions among that region. So I was thinking, how does it reflect actually the cultural identity or collective actions around the physical localities in that sense? I mean, it's absurd anyways. I just want to play around with it and see what surprises can I get out of the internet. So I made this project where I designed 10 sets of questions which I want to ask Google. So I kind of categorized them into two question types. So I ask in like here you can see on the screens where you can see how can I. So it's more like a sentimental, more like a emotional, introspective questions that I want to see, because I sometimes feel like this weird sense of collectiveness where you're only by yourself in front of the monitor searching on Google, but then when it pops up these questions, you suddenly feel like, somebody else searched before me and they asked the same questions that I do. And I don't feel that stupid or that lonely in that sense. So I kind of see this collective loneliness in a way. And the other type of questions I typically ask, I'm searching through dictionary. So I ask about what history is, what reality is, what truth is, and this kind of more definitional answers. And all these all these answers that pops up in the first 10 top search results, I captured them and I put them side by side and see how they are different or similar to each other's based on the two regions. And in this piece that I showed on the first phase in post-human, it becomes a digitalized version where you click on the website and you can experience the two poems, I would call them, like this kind of algorithmic poems that created by Google's. And some are really interesting, as if this one, what will happen? Because if you see in the region Hong Kong, it's really asking about what will happen to Hong Kong, what will happen to our future, what will happen to 2047, which is the date where we're supposed to end this treaty with Middle agreement that will be officially back under Chinese governance. But then if you search in the Netherlands region, it's basically about Bitcoin, economy, the future, yes, also XRP, like very economy based questions. And yeah, I think this is one of the most honest reflections from Google in that sense. So this is only the results that happened in March, because this piece is done March this year. And I invite everybody to just play around with Google and see what you can find. And I think this is one way to explore about this border. How do we define borders in this contemporary sense, and how do we actually define cultural identity? I mean, this is such a weird term, but then, yeah, I think it opens up a lot of questions of how do we see ourselves in where we live and where we are based and where we come from. This is a very long, short recap. I'll pass it on to Bobby. She has also a very interesting exhibition online in the first phase.
Thank you, Serene, your introduction, and also Yan Yan and Kobe. So I think before we kick into my interactive exhibition, I also can briefly talk about the background of the project I have been working for 5 years. Is called Genetics Along. And I'm usually actually working on performance, film, test, installation, and actually genetic engineering is like the first time I have the courage to touch, because I don't have any background about this topic. But I still trying to use my best and also my practice to trying to explore the topic, because I still believe this like very serious or scientific topic, everyone have the ability and also the right to questioning what is going on. And that is also the first reason why I decided to like going deeper. And I think the first trigger point is definitely in the 2018 when they have Chinese scientists genetic design 2 babies, and there has so many ethics discussion, and I decided to go much more further and deeper to my project Genetics Along. And this is I think we can kick into the website now. So the project is about how I present like a fictionalized future where even though just a genetic beauty comedy, also they can allow the customer to beautify themselves in any way they can imaginable. For example, today I want to be a Taylor Swift, then I can just become Taylor Swift. I want to be a potato, I can be a potato. So it's like, it's just basically in this whole framework, I trying to question what will be happen in the system and also the future human history. And since I'm like working in exhibition, so I'm usually working with the film, the tests, and also in this whole kind of presentation. And for the first time for my exhibition, for the project is called Genetic Waiting Room. I invited the participant artists from the post-human narrative to become the character of the salon. And all of us, totally we have 5 people, 4 artists and 1 curator. And Kobe also part of the cast. And we become the receptionist of the Genetics Salon. The reason why I'm picking the receptionist as like the first scenario I want to explore the topic, because every time when I enter the waiting room, I just think so fascinating, because you're basically just waiting for your future, waiting for the treatment. And while you're waiting, you actually have lots of imagination like what's going to happen, but you're just basically waiting. So based on this setting, I make like the whole story, like each receptionist, they were going to spend a time with you in the waiting room. And each of them, they're going to using different kind of way to experience time with you in the waiting room. And so that is like the basic story. But the reason why I'm asked like the artist to become the role is because I think 5 of us, we have our very interesting research focus of how to seeing futuristic human imagination. And when I'm touching with this kind of such a big topic, I don't really believe my singular narrative can enrich the whole collective imagination. And that is also the reason why I want to ask the professions to keep working in the project. And that is also one of my really favorite pieces. And Kobe also one of the cast. So she using her own way to trying to telling the story. We can actually go into your your room, Kobe. And based on her gender study, so when you when you become the customer, Kobe will coming toward you, and she will telling you to wait a little bit, and then after work she will telling you, oh, what do you want to change today? And in a way, for her, changing your of your body, just almost like changing your outfit, your clothes, that easy. So this kind of small kind of detail also enrich the whole project's narrative. And I think that will be something I'm continuing to doing while I am discussing this such a big topic with the audience. I think I will talk more about while we start the conversation. So that's all.
Thank you for the sharing. I would like to add some more of my opinion because in the first phrase, the subtitle is cyborg boundaries and situations, and it's more like 9 of us is telling a story from our perspective and how we understand what post-humanism is. And in phrase 2, the subtitle is the coexisting land. I think all of us are trying to find more common ground in between us. And yeah, I think Bobby, you choose the way to express yourself in phase 2 is quite interesting because especially the newspaper you put underneath the sand. Actually, I should try to find some photos, but
I can introduce a little bit of the pieces. I think this is also, I probably want to explain a little bit why I'm suddenly touching with a sci-fi fiction. I'm usually work on female body and also like a multiple roles for female in the family value and also in the culture. And the reason why I'm studying going to sci-fi because I realize I much more want to shift in myself toward to the exploration of the identity construction. I completely think the demonstration of the Hong Kong during the past few years is really affects the way how I'm seeing the identity, because when you experience in your reality, you can see the violence can tear the body apart and also destroy others of the identity. I'm also trying to asking myself that what is the reason I'm still want to be an artist in this reality. And I think I decided to try to find a fiction for the broken reality, which I think I'm living in a broken reality. Trying to find a silver lining for the dystopian narrative, even though I'm actually making a kind of dystopian project, but I'm still looking for hope from this amount of narrative. And that's why I'm start with the subject of the human genetic engineering, because I'm super interested with that paradox. It's like we're using the genetic technology to suppress our future fear, but at the same time, this technology also can flatten our whole genetic diversity of the mankind. And so with this kind of intention, the phrase 2, I actually writing like the whole fiction timeline for this for this whole 1,000 year from the 2018 when the Chinese scientists designed 2 baby, their gene. And then I start to going through with the COVID pandemic, where we also all we happen together, and how it's triggered to have the birth of the genetics alone. And so I trying to gathering some news or something. I wrote it, and also I invited some writers, some artists to give me some ideas of how it's going to happen in each different timeline, if different time years. That's all.
And I think it is interesting to discuss about what is science fiction, because science is something that we usually think is it must be real, it must be the closest to reality, but fiction is something in an opposite way, and science fiction is more like an alternative reality that we usually stick to, and a way to express ourselves. And in some sense, it is actually echoing with the reality, especially after the national security law. Um, I would say more and more artists and exhibition actually is heading to a way that we are just telling some story instead of reflecting the reality. But somehow I think it's the same to telling a fictional story and reflecting the reality. So I found it's quite interesting. And maybe Serene, do you want to share about more of your practice? Because I think the ambivalence is quite related to it.
Thank you. Yeah, I was trying to I was trying to find a way to articulate it better, but same as Bobby, like in the first place, I wasn't very. I mean, I wasn't the expert of science fiction. I mean, I know how it works. I mean, how it was defined, but then I wasn't a creator of science fiction, I would say. But then lately, I was really thinking maybe I was right.
We lost your voice a bit, Serene. Try again. Oh, unmute.
Yeah, is it
Yeah,
better?
okay,
Okay, great.
perfect.
Yeah, sorry. And yeah, and I was thinking about how do I approach or how do I actually define science fiction, because maybe in the past I was also like in a very layman way thinking it was all about science, futuristic, like technology. But then the more I think about it, especially in a post-human concepts, I would say, the technology is the part that we cannot let go, and it becomes like an inevitable part that is completely merging the reality and virtuality in our era, I would say. So in that sense, we are already like living in the science if we define it by the technology, and these days we cannot. It's like every single minute or every single action, small actions that we do, even for now in the webinar, we're with technology. So in the sense that, yeah, it's just how it's changed how I think about science fiction, and in a way that I because I was always, yeah, I'm seeing this work that I did in the in the exhibition. Well, let me go back to the ambivalence. So yeah, as you see, text is mainly the material that I like to work with, and a lot of works that I do is text-based, or I would say it's actually hermeneutics. So it's more about how to interpret and how to play with the text, and how do I deconstruct the text. And earlier this year, I wrote a book, which is about poetics and politics of ambivalence. And that book is basically inspired by a concept coined by how many years ago? It's in the 30s that when this Italian theorist, Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, he called that the times that he were in interregnum, and many other researchers and theorists use this term to describe the moment that we are living in now, the interregnum. So basically is a time where the old is dying and the new has not yet born. And I always miss out the second part of this concept, is that during this era, monsters may appear. So what does it mean by monsters? Is that things that were not recognized or things that were not officially identified or officially accepted in the mainstream appears. And for me, monsters is all about identification, because there's something that pops up where you have no words for it. So we need to reinvent, or we need to invent a new language to describe these things. And this is what we normally perceive of monsters, because it doesn't fall into any categorization that we used to have. So we have to think of a new way to see how do we put this thing and how do we acknowledge this thing. And exactly, I think this is one thing that we are facing now. And going back to all these political struggles and all these implications where Hong Kong people are in general concerned about how do we identify ourselves. And that's why earlier I said cultural identity is such a weird thing, because at the end, I feel like everything is linguistics problem. If we think of naming, if we think of monsters, like how do we identify and divide things and categorize them and segregate them? So everything basically, in a nutshell, you can say is a linguistic issue. So it's because we need to know, to know how do we call this thing in order to move on to deal with it. And I think in a way, this is something that I wanted to use as an approach to, I'm still thinking what is the best way, or how can it be more clean and neat if I want to address this issue as a ground where I can apply to how we see things in this moment, and how do we move forward in this half reality, half virtuality situation. And can it be an anchoring point where I start to speculate about future worlds? And for me, if I can think of, because science fiction for me is mainly about speculation in a very large overview, speculation based on the technology we have now. That's how I would like to think of science fiction at the moment. And how can I fit in this concept of, are we going to a world where we need to reinvent languages? We need to reinvent all the names that we had, or it's just not about new things. It's just that we have to examine what we are calling these things, and do they still means what they were meant before? I think this is what I, in general, was thinking about. And I think, yeah, this ambivalence is essential in everything. So because of this identity politics issue, so everything that we used to call before might appear in the exact opposite now. So let's say the far left is actually the far right in a sense, and the right, far right is actually the left. And this is where the ground that I used to think of things.
Kobe, do you mind if I jam in with one or two questions? And I'd love to hear you speak about the you know, what's upcoming for posthuman narratives. But there are two things. One concerns time, because Bobby was introducing the waiting room. And then I remember Serene talking about the time lag that you experience as an artist, that an artist is really quite different from an activist. So, I mean, I'm fascinated with how you guys are able to bring in that playfulness and lightness in this time of, what should we call it? Trauma, post-trauma, broken reality, as Bobby said, or ambivalence. So that's one question. Well, it's time and also playfulness. And then the other thing is the post in the post-human, because Kobe was introducing how you all shared a lot about how you interpret the term. And I thought the curation was beautiful in the way that it's like a prompt, and then you all get to develop your own projects in the long run. And the post, I remember Kobe saying that for you, it means sort of anti. And then I checked etymology. Anti, of course, we understand as, you know, in opposition to, over and against. But then as in antipasto in Italian, it's something you have before, you know, preparing your body for something. And then I sort of just speculate, as Serene said, well, maybe it's about sort of standing before a human who has a name by human, but you don't actually know whether it is a disguise for something else, a monster or a goddess or whatever. So I just would love to hear from you all your interpretations of the post, and then also how it will evolve.
Yeah, I think as per our last conversation, I think that post means you anti something that already exists, and you found that there's something not enough or maybe not correct. I'm not sure about the term, but I think it is more like a process of deconstructing and reconstructing. And the process is, I would say, is a bittersweet process that you can experience a lot, and you think a lot about like what is the position of artist or curator or even art, what can art deal with it, how to deal with it, and why do we need to deal with it. Yeah. Hope I answered your question.
Bobby, Serene? Your magic.
I was trying to remember. Yeah, I was trying to remember. I mean, I kept thinking about it since our last conversation, actually, because what was the first question? Sorry. I'm a bit lost in this
It's
time.
okay. I mean,
oh yeah, it's about time.
It's about time. What a phrase. It's the beginning of the end. No, but well, talk about anything. But I mean, the artist, what are you doing? What can you do? As Kobe said, what else do you want to do? What are the options?
I would say, yeah. No, for me, I was always thinking, because especially the last year or two, people started to call me a very aggressive political artist, and all my work seems to be heavy and dealing with politics in some way, especially politics in where I'm based or where I'm born from in Hong Kong. And in general, in larger narratives, it's about post-colonial and all this aftermath that we are facing. And I remember in my graduation exhibition, somebody came and asked me, "Do you regard yourself as an activist or an artist?" I had this long conversation with that person that I don't mind. Honestly, it's again naming. I don't mind whatever you call me. I don't need to be called an artist to be an artist, or I don't need to be called an activist to be an activist also. I just feel like I wouldn't regard myself now as an activist, or at least I really don't. First, I was maybe a bit shameful of not being practical in the sense, because in my personal opinion, that activist or political leaders, they are advocating for speedy and practical changes that would happen in a foreseeable future. For artists, I don't necessarily look for changes, or I don't expect anything that would happen. I mean, I'm open to the possibilities. I have a hope, or when I do something, I wish it would do something, but then at the end, I don't guarantee, or I don't even think it will happen. And that's how I define, I mean, that's how I don't regard myself as an activist. And I also feel like artists have this lens where you are more observant and you always stay a little bit, it's not laid back, but it's just that you put yourself in a position where you oversee everything, you digest, and then after that, maybe it takes some time, some years or even longer, you respond. And because it's not about immediate effects and immediate changes in society. And that's why I came up with this idea that I always feel like artists are, how do you call these people, with third eye? People in Chinese and Asian culture is yin yang eyes, where you can see both ghost spirits and human beings, like physical bodies and the elusive liminal space. And because I feel like artists, they know the language for these two worlds, and they know how to navigate and maneuver around these two different beings, where they know what is happening that needs, like a fire that needs to be put off right now. But then they also know that if we accumulate and if we just wait a little bit longer and reflect longer, in the future, there might be bigger changes that could happen, because we are not, in this moment, the person who is the most capable of putting off the fire. And yeah, I just, I sometimes I feel frustrated to be maneuvering around these two worlds, but then it's also a privilege. I am very happy that artists have this eyes where you can see these two space, and you can think of how you want to integrate them and how you can bring in new perspectives for people who are actually being very practical in a way. And it is for me a even more long-term and a more optimistic, but slow optimism.
Bobby, what about you?
I don't have much thing to say about the pose of the post-human narrative. In a way, when we have this discussion, just one thing, I just keep it in my mind during these 2 years when I'm in Norway. It's like, even though we all working on the identity or all about the identity, for me, I'm still struggling of how to define myself, because I living in China for several times when I was young. So when I was back to Hong Kong, I was being bullied for a few years because I'm speaking, I'm writing a Chinese simplified language, all this stuff. And this also made me, I can't really entirely recognize myself as a Hong Kongese. But when I'm moving to the Norway, it's also completely turning to a different table. It's like I'm almost becoming a representative of the whole Hong Kong community. And this has also made me feel a bit anxiety, anxious, but I would just keep it open, like, because I don't know. So we can actually move into the Q&A.
It takes time, don't worry.
Yeah.
One question that came in, a general question for all of the artists. With this discussion of the post-human as a speculative transcendence of a present form, how do you think we approach collectively building a healthy post-humanity, especially when, as Serene pointed out, our shared semiotics of reality seem to be so fragmented? It's a big question.
I just have one small opinion based on the question. I think during this week, I actually watching Ghost in the Shell TV series season 1. And I think the whole story also keep asking exactly this question. And I think if we perceive the future of the whole human system, the work of diversity definitely would be like the key point for how to create or approach like a healthy post-humanity. And this is also one reason why I go deeper to the gene, because about the gene, this is also the same approach. It's like why we have to keep the genetic diversity so much, because once you destroy one species, you're going to affect the whole species in the earth. So that's all.
I would say
Oh, sorry.
maybe, yeah, it's a quick answer. It's just that for me, I would say even though it's not on the surface, but I think I do everything that I make with art projects. At the end, I want to bring out empathy. I just hope that if people spend more time to understand things, and as I said, that when we know that things are not as we thought before now, then why not just take a moment and to rethink what does it mean? And if we do this collectively, I am still hopeful that people, we can come up to a conclusion, not necessarily something that is like a solution, but then we can negotiate and we can talk from there when we have the same ground. And yeah, it's like saying everything's about love, but then it's true. And also this love, is empathy, is not only for human beings, for all humans and non-humans. And when we realize that we are not just the only beings, I mean, we definitely not. There are so many other, not only about animals and plants, but then now that in technology and all these gadgets are integrated with our daily lives, and how do we see every non-human beings that are essentially interacting with our life? And if we think about all this thing as also an entity that deserves respect in a way, and deserve our attention at least, then we would not be too egocentric, I would say.
I was just going to quickly say that we have to feel each other's heartbeat. So then I think you said it also, Serene, in a different way. I wonder, Janet, because there are many other questions, and we are sort of over time, right? So how would you suggest that?
Would you have time for maybe just one more question? Just go in order here. We had one come in. How can international scholars and artists best support the Hong Kong art scene right now? My second question is, how is the Hong Kong art scene evolving right now compared to other art scenes around the world or in Asia? Well, we can take several hours on that.
Let me share something that in the chat box, I hope everyone can see it. It is a timeline developed by Professor Yi-Wen Kun at the University of Hong Kong. It's very recent and is now public. So it's a Hong Kong art history timeline. And there is the main timeline and there are satellite timelines. We have all been hoping for this for a long time because we need sort of one spot where people could check facts about what we're doing. So this is like a beacon. So I hope this helps. Like the fact that people do care and that you will come and visit the website and many other things that it points to would be already a big help. Thank you for that question.
I'm just going to join you back here on camera. Well, thank you, all of you, for joining us for this. I feel like we can go on for another hour about this topic. It's very enriching and enlightening. If you are attending, please stick around. We will be following up with Hope Revisited at 9 o'clock Pacific time. So hang around. We'll be having sessions until about 12 noon today. So we're going to take a short break. Thank you, everyone.